When we talk about the term digital forensics or computer forensics or cyber forensics, it more or less means the same thing. So we could define it that cyber forensics is the science of collecting, examining, analyzing, and reporting electronic evidence. This brings us to the first question. Where do we find this electronic evidence? We could find it in a hard disk in maybe deleted files. Now, what we really mean by deleted files is that when a file is deleted, it is typically not erased from the media. Instead, the information in the directory's data structure that points to the location of the file is marked as deleted. This means that the file is still stored on the media, but is no longer enumerated by the operating system. So the operating system considers this to be free space and can overwrite any portion of the deleted file at any time. Then we have slack space. All file systems use file allocation units to store files. Even if a file requires less space than the file allocation unit size, an entire file allocation unit is still reserved for the file. For example, if the file allocation unit size is 32 KB and a file is only 7 KB, the entire 32 KB is still allocated to the file, but only 7 KB is used, resulting in 25 KB of unused space. This unused space is referred to as file slack space, and it may hold residual data such as portions of deleted files. Another term that we come across is free space. Let's see what we really mean by this. Free space is the area on the media that is not allocated to any partition. It includes unallocated clusters or blocks. This often includes space on the media where files or even entire volumes may have resided at one point in the past but have since been deleted. The free space may still contain pieces of data or evidence. Now, how do we really handle this kind of evidence? We could do something called a logical backup. A logical backup copies the directories and files of a logical volume. It does not capture any other data that may be present on the media, such as deleted files or residual data stored in slack space. We have a much better alternative that we could use, and that's called as a bitstream image. Bitstream imaging generates a bit-for-bit copy of the original media, including free space and slack space. Bitstream images require more storage space and take longer to perform than logical backups. Another important source of digital or electronic evidence could be a cell phone, where you have information in the SIM card, phone memory, memory cards, as well as even information which is stored inside pictures, sort of like what the GPS information would be. And we have call data records. I'd like to discuss a couple of interesting cases I've investigated in the past. In one particular case, we were given a cell phone, I think it was a BlackBerry, and we were able to even recover details of a missed call made to that particular phone almost 3 years ago. Nowadays, when you take a picture using your smartphone, usually by default, the GPS location is embedded into that image. That means the latitude, the longitude, and in some cases even the altitude of where exactly that picture was taken. We've had a couple of unfortunate incidents in the past. In one case, a young boy, I think he was in the 10th standard, his dad gifted him a very expensive game for his birthday. So this kid naturally clicked a photograph, put it on his Facebook page to tell his friends about this lovely gift that he received. Now, unknown to this boy, there were a few adults actually who were part of his Facebook friend list, which he didn't know about. One of them was a thief. So when he saw this picture, he realized, okay, this boy has a lot of money at home. From the GPS information in that picture, he got to know the exact location where this boy was staying. And one night, he broke into their house to steal a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, he even ended up stabbing the boy's father in the bargain. This is why we've got to be very careful and ensure that in our cell phones, we keep the GPS location switched off in our photographs. Call detail records are used in a lot of cases nowadays, usually for conventional crimes such as chain snatching, sometimes even murder-related cases, housebreaking, and robberies. In cell phone forensics, we usually deal with iOS, BlackBerry, Android, and Windows Mobile. iPods could also be a source of electronic evidence. There was this very interesting case we solved a few years ago where there was this company which was doing a lot of confidential projects for the government. And naturally, every employee who would work on that project was thoroughly checked before he was allowed to enter office. There was this one young lady who would show up every day with her iPod, blaring music playing on that. Now, the security guards would thoroughly check her to make sure she wasn't carrying any data storage devices inside. But the security guards hadn't been trained that even an iPod is actually just a large data storage device. So, what she would do is, once she would be in the office, she would connect her iPod to the computer, dump some of the confidential information on it, then delete those files. Once she would reach home, she would undelete those files using a forensic software, and that's how she was actually siphoning out a lot of confidential information. Like I mentioned, iPods, even a USB drive naturally would be a big source of electronic information. Then, of course, you have digital cameras. In one particular interesting case, there was this lady who gave us a digital camera and asked us to recover all the deleted photographs from that. When we recovered those photographs, it showed evidence that her husband was actually having an affair with someone. And on a particular secret vacation he had taken with that woman, they had clicked a lot of photographs. Then they had deleted them from the camera memory. Well, they didn't really realize that that could be recovered so easily. And this information was presented to the court during her divorce proceedings. Other sources of electronic information could be CDs, DVDs. You'll be surprised to know that even floppy disks are still being used in a lot of industries, and they pop up in a lot of cases that I investigate. Then, of course, we have computer networks, Wi-Fi networks, and even the internet, which can be a huge source of electronic information. There's some very interesting cases where someone does a war driving, as a result of which he gets a huge list of open Wi-Fi networks, and then uses packet sniffing to actually sniff out a lot of confidential information. Digital evidence can also be hidden in pictures using steganography, encrypted files, password protected files, formatted hard disks, deleted emails, chat transcripts. In fact, it's not just electronic evidence. In many cases, we also come across physical evidence. For example, if you want to prove that a particular computer is being used by a particular person, you could look at the keyboard. That may actually have small quantities of dead skin from his fingers, maybe a hair or two that has fallen onto it, and conventional forensics could prove and match a particular computer to a particular suspect. At a digital crime scene, one of the first questions is, should we pull the plug or not pull the plug on a computer which is live and on? Pulling the plug could mean we could lose volatile operating system data such as slack space, free space, network configuration, network connections, running processes, open files, login sessions, operating system time, and a lot of other such electronic evidence. A few years ago, I'd built an interesting tool called Virtool, which is Volatile Evidence Retrieval Tool. It could run from a pen drive. You connect it onto any computer, any Windows machine, and a couple of clicks later, a lot of this volatile evidence gets dumped onto your pen drive. Another thing we've got to be careful about is when we decide whether to pull the plug or not, is that what if the person, the suspect, is using full disk encryption or he has encrypted drives? Now, at the time when the computer is on, a lot of those drives could actually be unencrypted or open for us to see. If we pull the plug, we'll never be able to access that data again unless we are able to crack his encryption or somehow get the password out from him. Then in some cases, you may even have passwords being stored in the RAM. A lot of applications and websites, when you log into them, for some time, the passwords are actually stored in the RAM. And while the machine is on, you could actually recover that information very easily. There are a lot of international standards which we should ideally follow in any kind of forensic investigation. Some of them are by the US Secret Service, the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence, the US Department of Justice, the ACPO, and of course the Asian School of Cyber Laws. All these standards are open, freely available, and should ideally be followed in every digital investigation. The write blockers are a very interesting technology that we use. A write blocker is either a hardware or a software based tool that prevents a computer from writing to computer storage media connected to it. So basically it would sit between your evidence hard disk and your backup hard disk. So you would have it in the middle. So it would make sure that even by mistake, you don't end up actually writing something to the original evidence disk. Mathematical authentication is a very, very essential concept. Let's take a simple example. Say in a particular crime, a knife has been used. So later when the evidence is presented to the court during the trial, a witness could stand up and say, yes, this is the knife that was confiscated by the police from the suspect at the crime scene. So the witness can actually look at the knife and come to know whether it's actually the same one or not. Now imagine the same thing for a computer. Which witness could actually do the same thing for a computer? Because the physical computer is not really important. It's the thousands of files inside that are actually evidence. No witness could actually say that none of those thousands of files have been tampered by the police after that computer was confiscated from the suspect, which is why we use mathematical authentication. So what we really mean by this is that at the time of confiscating the computer, the police would run a specialized tool which would go through the hard disk and generate the hash result. If you're using MD5, it would be 32 characters. If you use SHA, it could be 40 characters and so on. Now, in court, even years later, it can be verified that the suspect's computer or the hard disk has not really been tampered with if the same hash result is generated in front of the court. Chain of custody obviously is another very, very essential concept. This basically helps us to establish how the evidence computer, whether it's a pen drive, or how those pieces of evidence have actually been transferred to different people. Maybe first the police confiscated it, then they seal it up, send it to a forensic lab for investigation. Now it has finally been produced in court. So we would be able to prove that during this entire journey, from the confiscation to the final trial, every single person who was in charge of that evidence has been clearly accounted and documented for. Now let's have a look at some of the technical stuff a cyber forensic investigator should be very, very well versed in. The first obviously would be a good understanding of the important operating systems. Whether we talk about Linux, we talk about Windows, we talk about the Mac OS, various flavors of Unix. The reason for this is that each of these operating systems would be storing important evidence in different methods. File systems is a very, very important concept. And some of the important file systems that a forensic investigator should be comfortable with are the FAT, NTFS, High Performance File System or HPFS, the second and third extended file system, Riser FS, Hierarchical File System, HFS Plus, the Unix file system, Universal Disk Format, also known as UDF, the Compact Disk File System, ISO 9660, Joliet, etc. Let's take an example to understand why this is important. Data might be hidden through alternate data streams within NTFS volumes. Now, moving files with ADS to a non-NTFS file system would effectively strip this alternate data stream from the file. What it means is that important evidence stored in this ADS can be lost if analysts are not really aware of their presence. Of course, there are many software and processes that are available for us to be able to identify whether ADS evidence actually exists. File extensions, of course, are important because in many cases you would find the suspect has maybe saved a docx file with a .jpg extension. Now, when you would try to double click on it, it's not going to show up as a valid file, but he knows where his information is actually stored, and he would first change the extension and then be able to access it. Another thing that's important for us is we should know the extensions of popular software used by the suspects, which may be accounting software like Tally, which may be a gaming software, a gambling software. We need to understand what the different file extensions used by these software are. File signatures basically refer to data that is used to identify or verify the content of a file.